Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani, and welcome to part 2 of our Paleo diet series using lab works to help you transition successfully to a healthy diet. So in part 1, quick review, we talked about some of the markers that you can see before you go paleo here, pre, to 1 to 2 months later, what some of the markers are to improve. So briefly, we see lipids improve. Your blood markers, whether it's triglyceride to HDL ratio, cholesterol to HDL ratio, and inflammatory markers. We also see blood sugar markers also improve. And these are kind of some of the big things we see when we drive an anti-inflammatory, nutrient-dense, low-toxin eating plan. These are some of the nice benefits. Now, when you hit the common roadblocks here, so let's say you're before you started paleo, now you're 1 to 2 months in, you've seen some improvement, right? Great, then you're on the right track. Let's say you're hitting a couple of roadblocks. Let's say you're fatigued, you have energy issues, your fingernail quality doesn't look good, you still have some digestive issues, and maybe they've even gotten worse since you upped the protein and meat content. More bloating, more gas, more constipation, more diarrhea, etc. More fatigue, so you still have cold hands or feet, or you still have brain fog. Well, we gotta dig in deeper. Now, if it's gotten worse since you've gone on a paleo diet, well, typically what that means is you're eating less carbohydrate. Carbohydrate naturally is easier to digest and process by your body, and you're eating more protein and fat, which if you have a weak link in your digestive chain, that could be revealed by having more symptoms on a paleo diet. Again, anti-inflammatory, nutrient-dense, low-toxin food should not make you feel worse unless your digestive system is impaired in some way or another. And we're gonna dig in today on what that may be. So, we've done all these tests here. We've adjusted our macronutrients, our proteins, fats, and carbs. We've added all of the different things, right? The whole paleo template is an evolutionarily adaptable plan, eating foods that we've had longer time to adapt to. Now, I'm gonna go right down to step 3 here. What are the paleo roadblocks? Well, we have people that have come onto a paleo diet that may have been vegan or vegetarian for a while, and they may have an anemia in the background. And because of that anemia, their stomach acid and their digestive secretions aren't used to being tuned up because they're typically eating a lot of easy to digest foods. So we may have an anemia or a B12 issue or a folate issue in the background. And there may even be some gastrointestinal inflammation there that's preventing us from binding, let's say, our B12 in our stomach. Potential there. We may have some low hydrochloric acid levels that are preventing us from ionizing. That means hydrochloric acid hitting minerals so the minerals can go in our bloodstream, such as iron and calcium and selenium and magnesium. So we may have some issues there because of an anemia or digestive issue. Now we go right down to the infections. We may have some chronic infections, whether it's a parasite infection, a bacterial infection, or even a fungal overgrowth. Now, all of these things are going to affect our immune system, right? When our immune system's off, 70 to 80% of our immune system lives in the GALT and the MALT of our intestinal tract. GALT stands for gastric-associated lymphoid tissue, i.e. lymphocytes, and MALT, mucosal-associated lymphoid tissue. GALT's in the stomach, MALT in the small intestine. So you can see we can have different infections, parasite, bacteria, fungus, and even viral issues that could be affecting our immune system and thus our absorptions. When we have digestive immune stress, that fires the parasympathetic, vice versa, that fires the sympathetic nervous system. So we have this sympathetic and parasympathetic branch, right? So we have our PNS here. This is our parasympathetic nervous system. And then we have our sympathetic nervous system over here, okay, i.e. fight or flight, and i.e. rest and digest. And you can see when our sympathetic is heavier here, right? This being low, it's like a seesaw here, so this is essentially heavier. When our sympathetic nervous system is heavier and our parasympathetic nervous system is lower, what that's going to do is that's going to drive more of our fight or flight, and that's going to decrease hydrochloric acid, that's going to decrease enzymes, and that's going to drive blood flow, increase blood flow to the extremities, arms, hands, and feet to run, fight, and flee. And this is one of the major issues when we're under chronic stress. And that could be stressors that are internal from infections. And then next we have thyroid issues. So the cold hands, the cold feet, the constipation, the mood issues, the energy, we want to dig into thyroid. Thyroid's really important. We want to run a complete thyroid panel, and we're going to go into that in a second. So let's back it up. When we see anemia issues, a couple things we'll see on some of the lab tests. We'll see if we run an iron panel, we'll run TIBC and UIBC, which are different iron binding proteins, and they actually tend to go high when iron's low. So basically, imagine the more binding proteins we have is because our body needs more iron. So the more times we're grabbing for the iron, the lower our iron is. So binding proteins go up, UIBC, TIBC. We typically see iron saturation drop, and we typically will see ferritin also drop. So you can see these are a couple different patterns we'll see on our blood tests for iron-based anemias. The next thing we'll also see, we'll see a decrease in red blood cells. We'll see a decrease in hematocrit. And then we'll see a decrease in hemoglobin. And it may not even be low, like on a conventional blood test. It may just be in that bottom 20% of the range. So anytime we start going below into the 12s, I start getting a little bit concerned. Now this just looks at a broad spectrum anemia. This is the first pattern we look at here: RBC, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. The next pattern we look at is the one I just mentioned. That's the iron panel: iron sats, ferritin, UIBC, TIBC, and iron saturation. So if we see the iron saturation low, and then we see all these other markers low, then we probably have an iron issue. Now, the next thing I mentioned was the B vitamin. Well, a couple things here. We may see these markers that are looking at how big, essentially, is our hemoglobin. We'll look at MCH, MCHV, or MCHC, MCV, MCH. These are just markers that are just talking about how big are our red blood cells / hemoglobin. So mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, mean corpuscular volume, mean corpuscular hemoglobin. So they're just looking at how big size of red blood cells. The bigger our red blood cells are, that means the more immature they are. Red blood cells actually start out really big, and they actually get smaller as they mature. So as they increase in age, as age goes up and maturity goes up, the red blood cells actually get smaller. Where an adult, think of a baby to a 20 or 30-year-old person, they get much bigger in size. It's the opposite. So red blood cell as a baby here, red blood cell as an adult here. And you can see we base it off of some of these markers: MCHC, MCV, MCH. Really good markers to know if we have an anemia issue. And to keep it really simple, 2 kinds of anemia: B vitamin and iron. That's it. And if we have a vegetarian history or a lot of gastric inflammation that could be driving malabsorption, we want to look there. Next, we're going to talk about the infections. I already went over that in depth, but let's go over some of the lab testing. Keep it really simple. It's going to be a lot easier to go over than the previous one, but we're going to look at specialty lab tests here. That will be a stool panel, whether we're looking at PCR or a stool culture test to look for infections. Not just our general conventional hospital or LabCorp or Quest test. I run many of those, and a lot of times they miss the infection. Sometimes we get it, a lot of times we don't. And some of the specialty tests, especially the DNA PCR-based testing, we have a higher level of sensitivity and specificity on them. We can also draw conclusions from our conventional CBC with differential panel. That's just looking at our white blood cells as well as all of the individual white blood cells, right? We have our neutrophils, we have our lymphocytes, we have our monocytes, we have our eosinophils, and we have our basophils. Okay, we learn it in school: never let monkeys eat bananas. That's a really easy way to remember it. So our neutrophils right here, these are going to be primarily bacterial increased. So if we see an increase in neutrophils, we're going to think bacteria, all right? And if we see high neutrophils above 60, we're automatically going to kind of gravitate towards H. pylori issues. Next, we have our lymphocytes. I'll draw lymphocytes down here. If we see lymphocytes low, we automatically think a chronic viral issue. Chronic viral issue. If we see it high, we think acute viral issue. Now, when we see neutrophils and lymphocytes, when we see neutrophils on the higher side, lymphocytes low, we think H. pylori. That's a very common pattern. When we see monocytes jacked up, it typically means our immune system is fighting an infection. When monocytes are increased, we think that there's an active infection going on. Active infection. And then when we see eosinophils up, eosinophils, typically when they're above 3, we almost always think parasites. And we see it higher and higher and higher, the more likely chance there's a parasite infection. Now, we don't know what specifically, so when we see the eosinophil go up, we think increased parasite chance, increased parasite probability, and then we reach to those specialty lab stool tests, because that's going to help quantify exactly what type of infection we see. And when we see the eosinophils go above 2, we're thinking potential parasites. And last but not least is basophils. When basophils go out of range, typically above 1 or 2, we start to think tissue inflammation. We think potential allergies and tissue inflammation. And again, it's non-specific. That's why we got to dig deeper into the more specialty tests. So recap, neutrophils high, we think bacterial infection. Lymphocytes high, we think a acute viral issue. We see it low, we think a chronic immune stress. We see monocytes up, we see potentially an active infection we're fighting. Eosinophils, we think parasites. And then basophils, we think active tissue inflammation, non-specific active tissue inflammation. And again, with the thyroid here, we typically run our TSH, which is our brain test here. Real quick. We run our brain test here. This is our brain. We measure TSH up here to get a window into what's happening with our brain. We have our thyroid down here. This helps look at T4. This is what's coming out of the thyroid tissue. And we have free and total here. And then we have our T3 that gets converted throughout the body. All right, we have T3 down here. And our T3 gets converted in a couple of places. Our T3 gets converted at the liver. It gets converted by the intestines. It gets converted by healthy stress levels. And it also will get converted at the thyroid. About 20% gets converted at the thyroid. So you can see here, we have our brain, which then talks to our thyroid, measured by TSH. Our thyroid spits out T4, free and total. And then we have our T3 that gets converted by the liver, by the intestines, by healthy stress function, and then also by our thyroid gland itself. And we want to run all of these different tests, and then we even have our antibodies too, which are basically looking at our immune system. So we're looking at our immune system above, which could be actually attacking that thyroid gland and making various antibodies called TPO, TB antibodies, thyroid binding globulin antibodies, and even TSH receptor site antibodies. So you can see we have our anemia, our B vitamins, and our iron. We have our infections. We have our typical red blood cell test that looks at all the different sizes of red blood cells, as well as the white blood cells, like I mentioned. We have our specialty stool labs, and we have our complete thyroid panel, looking at brain, thyroid, and the thyroid conversion constituents called T3, which is our active thyroid hormone. So we went over a lot of stuff here today. If you're struggling on a paleo diet and you're not getting the results you're looking for here, the next step would be click on screen. You're only one step away from getting to the underlying issue. If anything I said resonated with you, make sure you subscribe down to my thyroid hormone video series. I go more into depth with some of these things, and we can help get your health back in your hands and get to the root cause of why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Again, this is Dr. J signing off here. Have a great day.